Watershed. It's a real pleasure to be here. I am anxiously looking forward to lunch because I don't know why else all of you would show up. Must be a pretty good cook. One thing I want to make perfectly clear before I start is that I am in no way here to tell you how you should or should not run your farm or ranch. That's totally up to you to decide. I will, no doubt, say some things today that you may take a little bit of offense to. Tough, get over it, okay? We can still shake hands and be friends. I'm here today, though, primarily to stimulate some thought process. So because of that, I need to know a little bit more about you. How many of you are grain farmers? Raise your hand. Okay. How many dairy? Got some. Livestock, beef cattle? Oh, a lot of beef cattle. Good. Okay. Orchards, vineyards, anything like that? Vegetable production? Got quite a few vegetable farms. Good. Okay, how many agency? NRCS, extension, etc. Number. And then I see those students in the back. How many students do we have here today? That is great. And I understand FFA students, that's something near and dear to me. That's how I got my start in agriculture. I grew up in town. I was not from a farm or ranch. But I was fortunate enough, I took a VOAG class when I was in the 9th grade, and it absolutely changed my life. I knew that was where my future lied. Today, my wife and I, along with our son, ranch on 6,000 acres. I used to say it was east of Bismarck, but now it's in city jurisdiction. This was a ranch that was started by my in-laws back in 1956. And they farmed it from 1956 until 1991 when we took it over from them. My father-in-law was extremely hardworking. Both my in-laws were. Primarily grew mainly spring wheat, a little bit of oats, barley, but he loved to till, and I'll talk more about this picture later. I learned how to farm from my father-in-law. And so I was brought up in the conventional mindset. But one thing about me, being from town, I was always curious to learn. And I was curious to learn about different methods of agriculture. So in 1994, I bought that no-till drill, and I went 100% no-till. I had a good friend, northern part of North Dakota, who was a no-tiller at the time, and he told me, Gabe, you need to go no-till in order to save time and moisture. Realize we're in an environment, we get about 10 to 12 inches of rain every year, and another 6 inches from the 70 plus inches of snow we tend to get. So he said, no, let me give you some advice. If you go no-till, sell all your tillage equipment. Then you can't go back. And I actually had to do that. I had to sell my tillage equipment in order to buy that no-till drill. That's what's called commitment. Okay? And that's missing today in a lot of people who want to move down the regenerative path. Well, the first year I no-tilled, 1994, was an excellent year. We had decent prices, I had an excellent yield, and I thought, boy, I've got it made, this is good. 1995 came along, and the day before I was going to start combining 1,200 acres of spring wheat, lost the whole thing to hail. Wiped out every acre. That was tough to take. I didn't have hail insurance because it just rarely hailed on that farm. Okay, so had to go crawl into the banker, tell him I wasn't going to be able to pay back the operating note. I paid the interest, but not the operating note. 1996 came along, and sure enough, we got hailed out again. Lost 100% of our crop again. However, I had planted some peas that year, and I had them combined before the hailstorm. And I went in and I planted cereal rye and hairy veg, so I was starting to diversify a little bit. 1997 came along, and we dried it. Nobody in the area combined an acre. It was a tough year. So 3 years, no crop income. leads to off-farm jobs in town, and the banker not willing to loan me much money anymore. 1998 came along, and that's an actual photo I took from my farm that day, and I knew what was coming. Sure enough. That was in June. We lost 80% of our crops. So 4 years, basically no crop income. Things were really beginning to look pretty dire. Okay? However, back in the winter there, I went to a workshop, and I heard a rancher from Alberta, Canada speak. His name was Don Campbell. And he said this, and it absolutely changed my life. He said, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. If you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. So here I was, I had a young family, I had a mountain of debt, we were $1.5 million in debt. How am I going to make my ranch profitable? The bank wasn't going to loan me money anymore. Now I was very fortunate. We had a contract for deed with our in-laws, and I was pretty sure they weren't going to foreclose on us. But they were very understanding. But I couldn't borrow money. Well, I really came to the realization that I'd been degrading my resources with my management practices. And even though I was no-till, it wasn't enough. So I got looking. A lot of things changed during those years of disaster. And I'm going to talk more about them. I'm going to talk about the 6 principles of soil health and the 4 ecosystem processes. And think of what happened. I tell people, those 4 years were extremely difficult to go through. I don't wish that on anybody. However, it was absolutely the best thing that could have happened. Because God was teaching me the principles of soil health. What happens when you have a hailstorm that absolutely levels everything on the ground? You're putting armor on the soil surface. I'd already stopped tilling, so I was doing that. Because the wheat got hailed out, I was starting to plant different crops. I was beginning to diversify peas, corn, winter triticale, hairy vetch. I was adding diversity. And it really got me thinking about just how the current production model was not working. And I'm going to run through this scenario, and I know this may tend to offend some farmers, but stop and think about it. Okay, as farmers and ranchers, we are told over and over and over again that we need to feed an ever-growing population, right? We got to feed the world. We're told that every day. That's the mantra. Your agronomist tells you that, your co-op tells you that, hey, you're feeding the world. You got to focus on yield in pounds, right? Got to get more and more yield. So we produce corn, we produce soybeans, lots of it. We produce wheat, all monocultures. We put animals in confinement so we can produce more and more and more, right? That's the aerial imagery of a beef feedlot. What's the result of all those practices? The result is we have a loss of biodiversity. Think back, look at nature. How does nature work? This is a native pasture on my ranch. For 5 years, my son taught range management at the local community college. He brought his class out to this pasture, and in 2 hours, they collected over 140 different species of grasses, forbs, and legumes. Yet what are we doing in agriculture? Monoculture corn, monoculture wheat, monoculture soybeans, right? What does that do for biodiversity? This lack of biodiversity has led to what? Fact of the matter is, it's led to the destruction of the soil. Farmer had a forested area there on the left, 4.3% organic matter, high in carbon. Cleared part of that forested area, farmed at monoculture soybeans with tillage for 17 years. That's the same soil. The same soil. If you take a look under the microscope, look at the difference. No tillage when it was forest. Look at the pore spaces. How much water could infiltrate in there? And then we need to realize biology lives in and on thin films of water in all these pore spaces. How much biology are we going to have over here? How much water is going to be able to infiltrate over there? That lack of biodiversity leads to lower nutrient cycling. If you don't have the biology, you're not going to cycle nutrients. So then what do we need to do? We need to increase our use of synthetic fertilizer, correct? That increased use of synthetic fertilizer leads to what? The decline of what? The decline of mycorrhizal fungi in biology. If you don't have mycorrhizal fungi in biology, you're not going to build soil aggregates, and I'll talk more about that this morning. You don't have soil aggregates, what happens? You can't infiltrate water, then we got water problems. Then what? Our communities have flooding problems, right? This synthetic fertilizer use also aids in the propagation of what? What loves nitrate, nitrogen fertilizer? Weeds, exactly right. So we get more weeds, then what do we need to do? Causes an increase in the use of herbicides, right? One thing, do we realize when we go and spray a herbicide, a lot of these herbicides are chelators. Chelators mean they bind to metals. So we spray a herbicide, and then that herbicide ties up zinc, manganese, iron, copper, any of these metals. Now those metals are unavailable to the plants. What do our plants need to ward off disease? The same minerals that we're tying up. So then, because our plants can't ward off diseases, what do? We got to spray a fungicide. You see where this is going? Nobody can disprove what I'm saying. This is all fact, okay? We just got to think through it. Fungicides are detrimental to what? Soil biology. The same soil biology that we rely on for nutrients. You see the vicious cycle agriculture is in? Because plants are not healthy enough to ward off pests, then we do what? We spray pesticides, or we apply it to the seed, right? Because we spray pesticides, we have what? A decline in insects, including pollinators. The same pollinators that are required to pollinate our crops. Does that make any sense? Those pesticides also cause a decline in predators, the very predators that are needed to control the pests. Sure, many of you have heard of Dr. Jonathan Lundgren, world famous entomologist. I'll talk about him coming up, but I'll never forget back in 2012 when I heard him say, for every insect species that's a pest, there's 1,700 that are beneficial. So why in the world would a farmer spend time, money, and effort spraying to kill that one pest? Why not just provide home and habitat for the 1,700 beneficials? They'll take care of that pest. But how many of us do that? How many of us provide habitat so those predator insects, those pollinator insects can thrive? What effect does the current production model have on our resources? Any idea when this video was taken? Yeah, last month in Kansas. There's Iowa in 2017. I'm sure if I would have searched the internet long enough, I could have found the same pictures for Wisconsin. I realize that a lot of producers here in Wisconsin till. The question is, why? Take a look at this photo here. That's on the lower right. It's Colorado, 1935. The upper left, Colorado, 2014. Pick on the NRCS people. What has your agency done in 80 years? Okay? What do you notice the difference between those two photos?
Soil on the right is dark.
Right, soil on the right is dark. What does that tell us?
Biology is still there, yeah.
Biology is still there, and what else?
Carbon.
There we go. Who said that? Yes. I'll give you a book. Come see me now. It's the carbon. Look at this. Okay? Now, I have the good fortune I get to travel extensively. I've been on literally thousands of farms all over the world. I have never, ever, not once, been on a single farm, including my own, that's not degraded. And it shows right here. We hear over and over as farmers, we're responsible for climate change. Well, I beg to differ with that. We are not responsible for all of it. But do we need to take our fair share of the blame? Absolutely. Every single farm or ranch is degraded. Part of the carbon that was once in our soils is now in the atmosphere. We, as farmers and ranchers, need to get that back in our soil. Number one, to help with our profitability, as I will discuss. But number two, to ensure that future generations, that all these young people that are in this room today, have the opportunity to farm and ranch. Because let me tell you, it's not pretty what we see out there. Just look at this. And we see it everywhere. I hope you go think of that next time you go to till a field. Right? So what have we learned in 79 years? So that was between these two photos. You know, now it's 86 years. What have we really learned since the Dust Bowl? We're still degrading our resources. So when Tom gets up here and talks and encourages you, we got to start working on conservation. Yeah, we need to do that, and we need to do it immediately. This is a photo I took about 5 years ago. My son took it. That's me standing in this ditch here. That's the neighbor's field right behind me there. He planted his spring wheat, no-till. Hasn't tilled for a number of years. We had 3 days in a row of sustained east winds over 60 miles an hour. Look at that soil there, okay? Here's a picture I'm pointing. That right there is the top wire in a 3-stand barbed wire fence. Filled the ditches. Take a look at his wheat field. I don't know how deep he seeded that wheat, but I guarantee you it was at least 3/4 of an inch, probably more like an inch, inch and a quarter. He lost all his topsoil. Now, I was fortunate those 3 days because I lived west of him. It actually blew a lot further than my place. Where's our soils ending up? Much of it ends up in the watershed. What happens? What's with that? As our soils move into the watersheds, don't they take with it nutrients? It is a proven fact that only approximately 40% of any nutrients you apply on your field in a given year are used by the plants that year. So think of that. When you go to the agronomy center and write them a check for fertility, 60% of that isn't going to be used by your crops. It's going to end up, unfortunately, much of it in the watersheds, okay? Unless you're doing practices like growing cover crops in order to hold those nutrients on the landscape. If it ends up in the watershed, what happens? Doesn't that affect water quality? You guys know that better than I. You see what's happening to the Great Lakes. You know, I can go into watersheds anywhere in the world and they have the same issues. Are farmers and ranchers to blame for all of it? No. Are we to blame for some of it? Yes. Why would any farmer or rancher want to write a check and then not ensure that stays on his land or her land? You need to do that. So I know this is rather sobering, but I came to the realization that the industrialized, commoditized production model is all about killing. And I tell people, I used to wake up every morning trying to decide what I was going to kill that day. Was it going to be a weed, a pest, a fungal disease? I was going to kill something. And I realized that by doing, I was really killing my profit also. Take a look at this. In the blue here, you have expenses. This little green or red is net farm income. I'll ask you this question. We're seeing a nice rise in commodity prices. What have input costs done? They've accelerated at a much greater pace, correct?
Got a picture of a rocket?
Yeah, a picture of a rocket, yes. Right? So this is the trend in agriculture. Do we really think that trend is going to change? What that trend's led to is an increasing percentage of U.S. net farm income is farm subsidies. Take a look at this graph, and this is over all 50 states compiled. Over 40% of net farm income is now government subsidies. Do you want to know what it is in strong agricultural states? Take a guess what it was for Kansas in 2020. What percent of Kansas net farm income was from government subsidies? 72%. And you can go, Iowa's going to be the same, Indiana, Illinois, I hate to say it, people. Wisconsin, not quite as high as that, but Wisconsin certainly well over 40%. North Dakota, much higher. Okay. Are we really independent farmers and ranchers, or are we relying on welfare? And I know that touches a nerve with many farmers and ranchers because they work very hard. Yes, you do. But you're relying on taxpayers to subsidize your farm or ranch. Let's be honest about that. We got to break that. So, we're told as farmers and ranchers we have to produce enough to feed the world, right? And there's approximately 7.2 billion people in this world. Okay? In 2019, it's the last total stats I have, how much food, how many people could we feed with what we produced in the world? 10.2 billion people. If you think a growing population is going to cure low farm prices, you're dead wrong. It's not going to happen. We're kidding ourselves if we think so. Are you really willing to sit back and wait for the world population to increase? Take a look at this. It's not likely to continue because, one, we have an increasing federal deficit. 3 years ago, it was $18 trillion. You know how much it is today?
30.
That's right. It just topped $30 trillion. Lower and lower percentage of this country's population is farmers and ranchers. What kind of say does that give us in Washington? Another fact, many foreign countries are phasing out farm subsidies. This past winter, I was hired by England to advise them as they're developing their next farm program. Okay? In 2025, their farm program will no longer pay farmers or ranchers based on yield. They're going to be paid according to how much carbon are you putting in the soil. How much biodiversity, plants, animals, insects do you have on your farm? How clean is the water that's leaving your farm? Has nothing to do with production. Has everything to do with all the ecosystem services. I think we're kidding ourselves if we don't think in the future that that won't happen here. It will. Last thing I want to talk to you about is aging population of trading partners. Do you think the population in the countries that are major trading partners of the United States Is their average age population increasing or decreasing? If it's decreasing, that's good. That means that population will consume food in the future. Folks, there's only one of our major trading partners that has a population that is average age is decreasing. That's Mexico. That's the only one. Are you willing to risk your farm or ranch's future on that? Waiting for that population to lower so they can purchase more food? The facts are simple. As farmers and ranchers, we need to understand this. We need to understand all these things. Everything I laid out for you here, I know it's sobering, and I don't know you did not come here to be depressed. I realize you came for lunch. But the fact of the matter is, you have to think about this, because your future depends on it, and the future of your children and grandchildren. So, the question I have for you today is, are you satisfied with your soils? Travel extensively, and I can't tell you the number of times I hear this. Gabe, you don't understand. We're too wet, we're too cold, we're too hot, we're too dry, I have clay, I have sand. One excuse after another. Take a look at these 3 soil beds here. One of these beds is from a farm with a very diverse crop rotation. The farm grows over 11 different cash crops, cover crops in between every cash crop. No livestock, does do some tillage. Another one of the beds is from a farm, only 2 different cash crops. No cover crops, no livestock, tillage. The third bed is simply from the edge of a field. Driven over by equipment, maybe grazed by an occasional deer or rabbit. That's it. Which bed is which? Let's have the FFA kids guess. Which is which? Just shout it out. It's okay. You don't have to buy lunch if you're wrong. Someone take a guess.
Top is the fence line.
Top is the edge of the field, this gentleman says. You're pretty old to be an FFA kid, but that's okay.
He was.
You were at one time. Yeah, that's all right. Yes, the top is from the edge of the field. The middle bed is from the very diverse crop rotation farm. The bottom bed is from the low crop diversity farm. You might say that makes sense, but would you believe I took all 3 of these within 100 feet of each other, and they are all the same soil type. They're all the same soil type. The good news is, just like we degraded, and I would contend even this top one is degraded, just like these soils were degraded, we can regenerate them. What you see here, this is my neighbor's soil, this bed here. He is over 10 years of no-till, okay? But no-till isn't enough. This is the rest of the soil on this shovel is from my field right across the fence from me. Okay? You see, it's our management, or as I like to call it, our stewardship, that makes the difference. Every single decision you make on your farm or ranch has either positive compounding effects or negative cascading effects. Every one. If you decide to go till a field, that's going to have negative cascading effects. If you decide to plant a cover crop, that's going to have positive compounding effects. You go to spray a pesticide, that's going to have negative effects. If Tom puts that insecticide on that wheat, that will have negative cascading effects. See, I had to get that little jab in there. Right? Every single decision you make, positive or negative effects. Fact of the matter is, your farm is a direct reflection of you. I hear these people every time I go speak come ask me these questions. I listen to them and then I tell them, I know what your problem is. Okay, what is it? Tonight when you go home, walk into the bathroom, look in the mirror, there's your problem. Okay? It's your decision. Your farm, your ranch is what is a culmination of the decisions you make. In Wisconsin, are you in a cool season or a warm season environment? Cool. Of course you're in a cool season environment. Yet you're trying to survive and have your soils thrive on only warm season crops. I'm not saying don't plant them, because you do have a warm season component in your native ecosystem. But you're out of context when 100% of your crop rotation is warm season. Your soils are degrading because of it. Second principle, no mechanical, limited chemical disturbance. Where in nature do you see copious amounts of tillage? Yes, earthworms and burrowing rodents move soil, but nothing like we're doing in agriculture today. Yes, plants put off chemicals, but nothing like we're applying in agriculture today. Nature always tries to keep the soil covered. It wants to protect the soil. Yet, what are we trying to do? We're tilling, leaving bare soil. Nature thrives with diversity, and I talked about that early on. Yet, what are we doing? Limited diversity, right? Nature has living plant root networks. Mycorrhizal fungi transfer nutrients into the water throughout the soil profile. Do we have living plants on our fields as long as possible throughout the year? The other principle is nature does not function properly without animals and insects. Yet what have we done? We've removed animals from much of the landscape and we kill the insects. And yet we expect the ecosystem processes to function. You see, the 6 principles drive the 4 ecosystem processes. Energy cycle, water cycle, nutrient cycle, and biodiversity. You know, I spent 4 years in college, have a couple different degrees, both in agriculture. Not once did they talk to me about these 6 principles. Not once did a teacher tell me about the 4 ecosystem processes. Yet, that is critical for every farmer or rancher to know. Everybody in agriculture needs to know these 6 principles and the 4 ecosystem processes, because our profitability and our livelihood depends on us doing just that, knowing that. If you understand the 6 principles and the 4 ecosystem processes, this becomes much, much easier. It starts here, the energy cycle, sunlight. Sun's going to rise every morning, set every evening. If it doesn't do that, we don't have to worry about it. Earth ceases to exist. Do we, as farmers and ranchers, do everything we possibly can to capture as much of this solar energy as possible? It all starts here, with living plants. Our goal as a farmer or rancher should be, how do I take as much of that sunlight as I can, and then, through what Christine Jones dubbed the liquid carbon pathway, which is the energy cycle, plants take in CO2 out of the atmosphere, photosynthesis occurs. We all learned about this in junior high. It's converted to all these different carbon compounds, what she refers to as liquid carbon. A plant uses part of that for growth, and the rest of it is moved down to the roots where it's exuded into the soil. That's the root tip of a plant exuding those carbon compounds out into the soil. Now, why does a plant do that? Why would a plant take so much of its energy and pump it out into the soil? The answer, of course, is to feed biology. Because it's that biology that feeds the plants. This is a water bear swimming in water. Our soils are subaquatic ecosystems. Biology lives in and on thin films of water in the pore spaces between the soil aggregates. I took crop fertility in college. Never once did the professor talk to me about this. That's ridiculous. This drives the whole nutrient cycle. Is your agronomist talking to you about this? You need to fire him or her. Your profitability depends on this. If they're not talking to you about it, they're just trying to sell you more synthetics. Okay? That carbon that those plants are exuding is consumed by bacteria, and that by bacteria then is consumed by predators. Protozoa, nematodes, for example. This is a photo of protozoa trapping bacteria around that air bubble and consuming the bacteria. That right there is the nutrient cycle. That's how plants get nutrients. I'll run through it briefly, and I don't want to bore you, but I sure wish that my teachers would have told me this years ago, because it would have saved me hundreds of thousands of dollars in fertilizer costs. Bacteria are approximately 5 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. This nematode here that consumes bacteria is 10 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. So what happens? The nematode comes, it consumes the bacteria. How many bacteria does it have to consume to meet its carbon needs? 2, of course, right? So, it gets its 2 parts carbon, but it also gets 2 parts nitrogen. Does it need 2 parts of nitrogen? No, it only needs 1. So what does it do with that other part? Out the back. There's your nitrogen for your growing plants. Does your fertilizer salesman explain this to you? Shame on him. Okay? That's the nitrogen cycle. That's how our plants get nitrogen. Now we can feed them nitrogen through synthetic fertility, but what do you got to do then? You got to write that check, right? I really think part of the problem with agriculture today is farmers and ranchers haven't been broke enough. If you were as broke as I was, you would understand, and you would become very allergic to writing checks. Your goal should be to sign the back of the check and not the front. Okay? I am in no way bashing chemical and fertilizer salesmen. But all I'm going to say, if you're going to use that stuff, you better use it judiciously and understand how this soil really functions. Now, bacteria do not consume all of those exudates that those plants put out into the soil. Part of that, those root exudates, combine with water and form a mild form of carbonic acid. And it's that acid that breaks down parent material. For instance, we've all seen something like this, a tree growing out of a rock, right? Here's another one. Ray Archuleta and I are in the Chihuahuan Desert. That's solid rock we're standing on. Yet, look at those grass plants growing out of that rock. How does that happen? Is there a pocket of soil in that rock? No, a seed lands on that rock. It's wet long enough to germinate. That little seedling starts to grow, takes in sunlight, starts exuding compounds out through the roots, combines with water, forms carbonic acid, starts breaking down that rock. On my ranch, I have not used a single pound of any synthetic fertilizer since 2007. And I had many people tell me, Gabe, you're going to go broke, you're going to run out of nutrients. Yes, you can get nitrogen from the air if you plant legumes through the rhizobia, but you're going to run out of potassium, phosphorus, all your minerals. You're going to deplete your soil and you're going to go broke. How many of your agronomists are performing this test on your soils? Total nutrient digestion. Yes. You need new agronomists. Okay? Total nutrient digestion is the soil's bank account. It takes into account both the organic and inorganic fraction of nutrients in your soil. Inorganic nutrients are water soluble. They're available to the plant the day that soil test was taken. The organic fraction, though, is bound to a carbon molecule. In other words, it's nutrients that are in biology, that are in dying, decaying roots of plants, that are in the parent material. So we consult on a lot of farms. We do this total nutrient digestion test on all the farms we consult for. We compiled the data from 45 farms, Manitoba, Saskatchewan, North Dakota. And I'll guarantee you it's not going to be much different for here in Wisconsin. Total nutrient digestion test, you take that soil down to 12 inches. You probe the soil, do many probes throughout a field, mix it up in a pail, send it in, 12 inches deep. Now let me ask you this, on your farms, I'm sure some of you are soil testing. What does your agronomist tell you you have available nitrogen? Somebody just shout out a number, what you've seen on your soil test.
30.
30, okay, thank you. That's what we often hear, from a low of 10 to a high of maybe 80 or 90. You want to guess what the average pounds of nitrogen per acre in the top 12 inches on these 45 farms, okay? 9,000 pounds. The lowest of any farm was 1,200 pounds. How about phosphorus? 2,300 pounds. Potassium, 11,000 pounds. Micronutrients, take a look at that. Oh, we got a line, we're short of calcium, really? 40,000 pounds. Okay? Every single nutrient we tested for, there's plenty of. Next question for you. How deep do your plant roots go? Do they only go a foot? That's all we tested, was a foot deep. Now, your roots better go deeper than that. Now, I know some of you have pretty shallow topsoils, but your roots go 4 feet, 6 feet, 8 feet. How much nutrients do you have? Fact of the matter is, on those 30 million acres, we've never ever tested a single farm that doesn't have adequate nutrients. Is your agronomist showing you that? So what's going on? If there's adequate nutrients, how come we can't grow a profitable crop without adding nutrients? Fact of the matter is, we have an availability issue. The nutrients are there, they're just not available. They're bound. So what are we short of? What can make those nutrients available? The answer is biology. We're short of biology because of our management. How many of you are agronomists test your soil and find out how much biology you have, how much predators, in other words, protozoa, nematodes? Guys, that's costing you money, lots of it. Fact of the matter is, to get more biology, we have to grow more plants. But Gabe, I grow corn and soybeans. Yeah, and how long do those crops photosynthesize? Maybe 100, 120 days max, right? They're not feeding biology. We have to focus on the 6 principles. First one, context. Ecological context. We all have a different ecological context on our farm or ranch. I use this as an example. This will show you how unintelligent Gabe Brown is. For 20 plus years, 25 years, I was in the registered business. I sold breeding stock. Okay? I was calving in January and February in North Dakota. That's not only out of context, that's just plain stupid. Okay? It is. It's just plain stupid. I was trying to calve out of synchrony with nature. So when do the deer have their fawns in North Dakota? Late May and June. That's when we calve. My son and I go fishing for a week during calving season. They can calve on their own. It's absolutely no problem. But you have to farm in context. Wisconsin, cool season environment, you're only growing 2 warm season crops. I'm not telling you to stop growing those. But you better diversify the crop rotation, get some cool seasons growing, and you better add cool season cover crops into that mix. Because your soil is degrading. Corn and soybeans is degraded soils. Proven fact. You're out of context. We all have a financial context. My financial context today is much, much better than it was at the end of those 4 years of natural disasters. But you need to work within your financial context. You young people in the room, for 25 years we ran an internship program on our ranch. Young people had come, the interns every year, and they'd tell me their dreams of owning a farm and how the first thing they wanted to do was go buy land. I told every one of them that's the worst thing you can do. You don't start buying land, you start by accumulating wealth. And then at the right point in time, the right opportunity will come along, then you purchase the land. You first have to get your financial house in order. Okay? We all have different financial context. Community context. How many family members are involved in your operation? What's your succession plan? Do you interact and work with the community? This here, all of you meeting here, this watershed group, that's a community. That's part of your context. And then I firmly believe we all have a spiritual context. You know, God put me through those 4 years for a reason. None of us who work in agriculture can deny that there's something much greater than ourselves, and we're blessed to be a part of it. We have to understand our context before we make any decisions. I can't tell you what your context is. That's up for you to decide. When we have a new client, the first thing we do is go sit down with the family. And we determine their context and talk to them, find out what they want to do. And then we help them develop a plan based on their individual context. That will help ensure success as they go on their regenerative journey. Second principle, least amount of mechanical and chemical disturbance possible. I showed you this picture. That's my father-in-law and his beloved disc. My father-in-law used to love to till the soil. I remember early on him telling me, Gabe, it's spring of the year. We're going to go till the soil and dry it out so we can seed. And I never could figure that out because come July we'd be on our knees praying for rain. It didn't make sense to me. But he loved to till. When he had his auction sale, he kept a tractor, took some proceeds from the auction sale, bought a brand new disc, and went and disced for neighbors. That was his retirement. That was his recreation. I proceeded to go 100% no-till, which really upset him. Good thing he loved his daughter, or I would have been out. He thought he had the last laugh. When he passed away, guess what Gabe got in his will? True story. True story. I got that disc. I had it sold within 5 days. Okay? But look at this. Here he is tilling. What do you see here? Some might say dust. Okay? Look at the pamphlets that were handed out to you. Grab one sheet of paper. The thickness of a single sheet of paper is the equivalent of 1 ton of topsoil per acre. How many tons of topsoil are being lost just by that simple tillage pass? Everything you do on your farm or ranch has either positive compounding or negative cascading effects. Is this a positive or a negative? How are you going to grow that soil back? Ray Archuleta put this slide together. I'm sure many of you have seen it, but I just have to include it in the presentation. This soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. What's protecting that soil from wind erosion, water erosion? What's protecting the moisture from evaporation? What's feeding that biology? What's keeping soil temperatures down? And we're going to talk more about that. Fact is, we should never, ever see bare soil on our farm or ranch. If we see bare soil, we're degrading our resource. Showed you these photos earlier. Now, does that make sense? We're degrading our soils, plain and simple. We're not providing that home and habitat for the very biology that could put more dollars in our pockets. I stole this slide from Dr. Dwayne Beck. All tillage destroys soil structure. Nobody can argue that. Case in point, highway department. If they go to build a new road, what's the first thing they do? They disc it, right? They disc it to collapse the soil, and that's shown right there. It collapses that pore spaces, see? So they have a stable foundation. Yeah, what are we doing to our soils? All tillage reduces water infiltration. This is a no-brainer. When we purchased that ranch from my in-laws, our local county NRCS representative came out and he measured water infiltration at 1/2 inch per hour. That's all we could infiltrate. As I travel around, that's a very, very common figure if tillage is involved. 1/2 inch per hour. Does it ever rain in Wisconsin here more than 1/2 inch per hour? So what happens in those cases? You're losing topsoil, right? With it, you're losing nutrients. All tillage reduces organic matter. What are the organic matter levels on your farm? So over the past 4 days, I've heard figures from as low as less than 1% to as high as 4.5%. Historically speaking, what do you think they were at? Pre-plow, I'll put it that way. Well, most soils in Wisconsin were probably in the 10 on up to the 14% range. So where are yours at now? Are they degraded? Final one, all tillage increases weeds. Nobody can deny that. You will kill what weeds are there, but you will cause more to germinate. And nature is trying to put a living plant in the ground to have a living root and to collect solar energy. Always amazes me how gardeners in the spring, what's the first thing most gardeners do? They go till their garden. Absolutely the worst thing you can do if you're trying to produce healthy food. Never, ever till a garden. You're going to be fighting weeds, you're not going to infiltrate water, you're not going to have the nutrient density in your food that you think you do. You need to have a no-till garden. It's the biggest challenge for organic producers is that tillage. To advance soil health, tillage must be kept to a minimum, preferably eliminated. And we can do that in agriculture today. Rolling down cereal rye. Look at on the right here. That armor protecting the soil. Larger equipment. Now we don't even have to roll it down and terminate it. With much of today's equipment, we can just go right into the living cover crop. If you're not organic, then you can go in, plant right into it, plant green, and then go use a herbicide if you're not organic. Today's equipment can do that. Vegetable farmers, we can have a cover crop and then transplant vegetables into that cover. Works well. Soybeans, following cereal rye, an absolute no-brainer. That just works hands down. Look at the armor on that soil. That rye sucked up all that excess nitrogen. You're going to have a much better bean crop because of it. I hear as I travel around, but Gabe, my soils aren't like that. Really? Seems to me, no matter where I travel around the world, all soil is made up of sand, silt, clay, or loam. All soil. Different proportions, but it's all made up of those 4 things. So how come I'm so confident this works anyway? And it all starts with plants. We gotta have photosynthesis, and we have to have the different root types, root depths. Why? Because we have to build soil aggregates. Does your agronomist talk to you? Does he take a shovel, he or she, and stick in your soil to see if you're building soil aggregates. On the left there, that's a millet plant. These are the roots of a millet plant. Biology, that interface there along that root, that rhizosheath, the glues from biology and glomalin from mycorrhizal fungi start binding these sand, silt, clay particles together to form soil aggregates. Do we understand as farmers and ranchers that a soil aggregate will only last approximately 4 weeks? Then biology is going to consume those glues, those carbon compounds, and new ones have to be built. What do you do every time you till? You're destroying soil aggregates. Do you have the program in place to rebuild those soil aggregates? Do you have the crop rotation and cover crops to do that? Soil should look like this. It should look like dark chocolate cake. Mycorrhizal and fungi and biology build soil aggregates. Take a look at the flooding that's occurring every spring now. Why is flooding occurring? Well, farmers have destroyed soil aggregates. Water is not infiltrated. Now, true, there's a lot of other factors. We're now farming most of the seasonal wetlands. That's a part of the reason. Let me ask you this. If you have soils like this, how much tile drainage would be needed? There's absolutely no reason for tile drainage. All you have to do is build soil aggregates and you can move massive amounts of water. Unless you're farming in the bottom of the basin. Okay? Yet, it seems to me a lot of people are making a lot of money selling tile. You see, people, the water cycle depends on mycorrhizal fungi and biology. I wish they would have taught me that when I was in college. Now, earlier this week, at several stops, they were talking about the drought that you had here in Wisconsin. I tended to laugh a little bit at that one, but it's all relative. How do we make ourselves resilient to drought? This is organic matter, percent soil organic matter over here on the left. This is water holding capacity in inches of water per 1 foot of the soil profile. So, you can pick which column you are, sand, silt, or clay. When we purchased our ranch from our in-laws, we were less than 2% organic matter. I have silt loam soils. That means I could hold approximately 2 inches of water per foot of the soil profile. Today, our organic matter levels are from 5.3 to near 8%. I can easily hold 5 to 6 inches of water per foot of the soil profile. That means I can hold 30 to 36 inches of moisture. Bismarck, North Dakota has never, ever, in recorded history, recorded 30 inches of moisture in a year, let alone at one time. Okay? That means that every raindrop that falls on my ranch, unless it falls on a road, is going to infiltrate. Okay? And I'm going to be able to store it. Because I do not till and I focus on building soil aggregates. What does that make? That makes that ranch very resilient. 2020 was the second driest year ever recorded in Bismarck. 2021 was the driest year ever recorded and the hottest year ever recorded. I still combined a small grain crop. No, it was not a bumper crop, but none of my neighbors combined small grain crops. I was the only one. Why? The answer is because of right there. I'm able to hold moisture. That makes me resilient to drought. Okay? Any questions up to this point? I've been talking. Yes, sir. Marty.
Nitrogen leaching, nitrate leaching, is that principle hold as well for nitrate leaching with that water holding capacity?
Does that principle hold for nitrate leaching? And I'll talk more about that coming up. If it's inorganic, it'll be in solution, but it'll move throughout the soil profile. You have to convert it to an organic form. Armor on the soil. This is one of my native paddocks. How much bare soil are you going to see there? None. Now, this pertains not only to tillage, look at grazing. Look at the differences across the fence line there. How much bare soil are you going to see here? Because of overgrazing. We see that over and over and over again. Here's Ray Archuleta. We're in the Central Valley of California. That's where much of the produce we consume in this country comes from. Is that soil protected from wind erosion, water erosion, evaporation? What else do we do in agriculture? We remove biomass, right? We bale up everything on top and haul it off, or we chop it off. This is a no-till field. They're no better off. No-till is one small part of the equation. Look at that, yes.
Yeah, Ray, Gabe, with that straw that we do use on a dairy operation, and we do put it back on the fields.
Yep.
The farm manure, are we losing much value of that in return of just leaving it versus taking it for the bedding, using it as a bedding pack, and then returning it?
And the answer is, it's not a perfect world. There would be some loss in there, but Tony, you gotta make a living. So you gotta do what you gotta do. So I am in no way telling you, quit bailing off your straw. If you do a good job and make sure there's armor on that soil, okay. But fact of the matter, most people aren't doing that. Most people are removing it, selling it to somebody, and then their fields are bare. Then they end up with things like this. So yes, you can be a good steward, haul it back on. That's definitely an option. I wanted to show this though, because even though this is a no-till field, look at how degraded that soil's become. There's a lot of people who think, oh, I went no-till, I'm there. No, that's one small part of the puzzle. Because what's happening, if you don't have living plants in there, don't have that armor on the soil, you're going to start forming that crust. Here's a better picture of it. Look at that crust forming on that soil. Just like if we cut our skin and a scab forms, that's what nature's trying to do here. It's trying to heal and protect that soil. Okay? What happens though if we have bare soil? Soil temperatures start rising, right? We need to know this as farmers and ranchers. If soil temps are 70 degrees, 100% of that moisture that's in the soil can be used by that plant for growth. What are we in the business of doing as farmers and ranchers? We need to grow things, right? We either need to grow a cash crop or a forage crop, right? Don't we want soil temperatures optimum for that plant? If that soil is bare and not protected and that temperature starts rising, that moisture is lost to evaporation, transpiration. I will guarantee you if I came here to Wisconsin on an 80-degree day, I guarantee I'll be able to take soil temperatures 140, 150 degrees and above. There's that much difference where there's bare soils. I was in Manning, Alberta, Canada. You fly into Edmonton, drive for a full day, you think you're going to fall off the Arctic Circle? You're in Manning, Alberta. And we recorded on an 80-degree day, we recorded soil temps of 140 degrees. I know what they'd be here in Wisconsin. Are you paying attention to that as a farmer rancher? Do you think about that when you prepare your fields? And look down here, we get over 140 degrees, you're negatively affecting soil biology. By soil biology, the majority of it lives in the top 2 to 4 inches of the soil profile, 0 to 4. I hear people over and over again, oh, I'm going to go till, but it's only lightly. Well, you just destroyed 80+% of the population of your soil biology. Okay? It's like a hurricane, a flood, and a tornado all going through a community. And that's what you did. The very biology that drives the nutrient cycle that affects your bottom line. Yes.
Back on your picture, you had a no-till field with the corn stalks. Yes, that one. Obviously, there was biology at one point, but it looks to me like they ran out of food.
Well, and they just didn't have a living plant. Good point, Marty. Yep. There's biology in every field. Even you take a field that's been plowed for 20 years in a row, there's still some biology. The problem is it's just bacteria. There's no predators. There's no mycorrhizal fungi. You can't build new aggregates. Yep. Good point. So, this is a picture of me planting corn. That's the type of residue that I want to plant into. Now that's changed as my soils advance. Early on, as I went into no-till and went down the regenerative plant path, I did not want that much residue. Because one of the things you always hear is, oh, soils are too cold, I gotta till. You don't have a residue problem, you got a carbon nitrogen problem. And we can talk more about that this afternoon. So, doesn't matter whether we have cover crops or if we're grazing. Here I'm grazing off a cover crop. Look at the amount of armor I'm leaving. That's that armor that'll protect the soil. We have to do that. One more before we take a break. Diversity. This is one of my favorite subjects. I so wish early on I would have learned the power of diversity. Take a look at this photo. That's a spring triticale crop. Looks pretty terrible, right? You're not going to bother to combine that. There's not much there, right? Now look at this photo. That looks pretty good. Look how nice, lush green. Look at the heads on that triticale. You might say, oh, but it's awfully weedy. No, it's not weedy. The difference is one's a polyculture, one's a monoculture. These were planted the same day on the same field with the same equipment, same management. One's a monoculture, one's a polyculture. Yet what are we told over and over in agriculture? Oh, we gotta have monocultures. You gotta go kill every weed, right? You can't have two things growing together. You're gonna rob moisture. Really? Look at that. Does that look like it robs moisture? No, it doesn't. Dr. Chris Nichols explains this way. She's talking about mycorrhizal fungi. Not only do the fungi provide for the needs of one plant, but that fungal hyphae pipelines connect to multiple plants, thus supplying the water and nutrient needs of all plants and biology. You see, nature is much more collaborative than it is competitive. Yet do we take this into account? This is Dr. Yamili in the pink. This trial took place in southwest Alberta. Just look at that difference there. Now, I want you to think of this. Those of you who raise forage for beef or livestock, do you plant monocultures or do you plant diverse polycultures? I'm willing to bet there's a number of you out there who have monoculture alfalfa crops. Right? Corn for silage as a monoculture. Why? Monocultures are a detriment to soil health, plain and simple. That's not how soil functions. We've known this for a long time. This is plant biomass on the left. This is work by Dr. Tillman, University of Minnesota. Plant biomass on the left, species diversity on the bottom. Look what happens. We have one species, then 2, 3, 4, 5. As we increase species diversity, we increase biomass production until we get to the point of too many plants per square foot. Okay? So if I'm out there and I want forage for livestock, even in pastures, don't I want them to be very diverse? Of course. More work by Tillman. Plant biomass on the left, functional diversity on the bottom. What do we mean by functional diversity? Grasses, forbs, legumes, trees, shrubs. Look at that. As we increase functional groups, we're also going to increase plant biomass. Now, I'll stop here for a moment and just have a quick discussion. Question, Wayne?
Joe Verbinski, what about soil insecticides? We haven't touched on any of that yet.
Soil insecticides. I will touch on that coming up.
Kill everything.
Kills everything. I'll talk about that after the break, okay? I want to touch on one other thing here. Go to the next slide. Take a look at this slide, all the different diversity in this mix, okay? And I've talked about what that does for the soil. But what does it do for the animals that consume that mix? If you consume just one thing, I don't care what it is, how would you look after a week, 2 weeks, a month? Okay? What are we doing to much of our livestock today? We're not offering them a very diverse diet. Plants have the ability to send out root exudates to attract biology to bring it different nutrients. Those are called phytochemicals, and I'm going to talk about them probably this afternoon. What we're finding, we work with a number of large dairies and beef confinement operations. We're seeing major health problems in the animals because of a lack of diversity in their diets. So one of the first things we do, for instance, if you're a dairy that's based your rations around corn silage and alfalfa, is we go and diversify. We add species in with the corn. Or we go to a very diverse cover crop like this. We no longer seed monoculture alfalfa. We seed alfalfa plus several different types of grasses and forbs. We're noticing a marked improvement in the health of the animals. In the case of dairy, we're noticed a marked increase in components, a marked increase in the health and reproduction in those animals. This isn't rocket science. This is how nature functions. Now, think of this very diverse mix. This is one of my multi-species warm season cover crops. Think of the energy cycle, what I discussed earlier. How much sunlight is going to hit the soil surface in this field? It's all going to be intercepted by a leaf, right? At least 99% of it. What I'm doing is I'm increasing photosynthetic capacity. Look at all the different leaf sizes and shapes there. My pocketbook, my profitability depends on capturing that solar energy. Look at all the different leaf sizes and shapes. That's photosynthetic capacity. How much sunlight can you intercept? As I improve soil health, we can actually speed up the rate at which those plants photosynthesize, create all those carbon compounds, move them into the soil. Photosynthetic capacity and rate. You get both those going, and you'll have the opportunity to significantly increase profitability. It all begins with photosynthesis. The more photosynthesis, the more carbon being pumped into the system. Now, where do you start? You got to diversify cash crop rotations. Corn and soybeans is just, you're degrading soil health. Okay? Plain and simple. I'm not saying you have to grow a bunch of species together, but you need to diversify. You know, Tom was cussing about wheat, but it's good in a rotation. It allows you the window of time to get a cover crop growing. We have economic analysis that shows and proves a corn, soybean, winter wheat cover crop rotation is more profitable than corn on beans. It is, because you can significantly cut input costs. Once you get further down the regenerative path, then we can start talking about polyculture cash crops, where you're growing more than one species together. This is my most profitable crop, year in and year out. It's cereal rye, winter triticale, forage winter wheat, winter barley, hairy vetch, and sweet clover. Since 2008, I have averaged $976 per acre net return after all expenses. Anybody doing that on corn? Maybe on specialty corn like popcorn or sweet corn, but not many, right? Why would I want to grow corn when I can make that kind of money year in and year out? I grow it together, combine it together, and sell it for seed because nobody else will do it. Okay? People laugh at me because I'm different. I laugh at them because they're all the same. Here's another thing we're growing. Oats, barley, peas, flax, and fava beans. I have now dropped the lentils out of there. They just didn't work too good in my environment. I've been growing this mix for about 8 years. Just put them together, seed them, combine them together. That's the perfect hog and poultry ration. We got to feed our hogs and our poultry. There it is. This year, past year, 2021, driest year ever. My fava beans looked real good early on, but we had 100 degrees plus first week in May. They just left. But I was still able to combine because the other crops did okay. And that's the beauty of that diversity. One species may not do good in a particular year, but the other ones do. And you'll say, some of you may say, oh, Gabe, but then it threw off your ration. You know what? I never had a single hog or chicken complain. It is what it is. And they do just fine. Anybody recognize this crop on the right here? That's Kernza. Many of you have heard about Kernza, perennial wheat. It's actually a perennial wheat grass. This on the left is Salish blue. That is a perennial wheat. Dr. Stephen Jones in Washington State realized what I had just said about the ability of one plant to proliferate when other ones don't. He took 45 heirloom wheat varieties and developed this perennial wheat called Salish blue. It is a perennial. You can seed it in the spring, but it needs to go through dormancy. So you seed it in the fall like winter wheat. It's harvested here in the northern plains about in July. Okay? Very dry environments in Montana, getting about 20 bushels per acre. Wetter environments, about 65. Okay? But it lives for years. We don't know how long yet. We've got some that's 5 years old, but we don't know how long it's going to live. And you just combine it every year. The beautiful thing about it is it's low in gluten. Most people who are gluten intolerant can eat it. It has fantastic baking qualities. Millers are scrambling, wanting to get it. Now, do you know what this sells for? $1 a pound, $60 a bushel. Why do I want to plant the same wheat as everybody else? Got 25 acres growing on my ranch right now. Yes?
Will it reseed itself to a degree from falling, you know?
No, it's perennial. The
It's
root
100%.
system is perennial.
It's 100%. Okay.
Yep, which is a good thing. Yep.
Yeah, I got a question.
Yes.
When you harvest that, does it start regrowing right away? Do you have your arbor?
Some of the plants will. There's what Dr. Jones told me is of these 45 different varieties, there's a percentage of them that will start growing right away. And they'll stay green and growing up till harvest. There's your living root to keep cycling things. And even those that don't grow a lot, they'll still green up. So you'll still have some leaf. Because we're combining straight, so you leave some leaf material there. So you will be able to collect solar energy. Yes?
I was wondering, I know that Kernza, from what I understand, Kernza has a higher yield first year, and then it tapers off. Same thing with the Salish blue?
We're finding that out. So far, the first 3 years, there's not much variation. We're just finding that out. The seed is not readily available yet, but we're propagating it. The company that owns the rights to this seed hired our firm, Understanding Ag, because they only want this grown in a healthy soil. So it's up to our firm to determine where it gets grown. So be nice to me. What I'm trying to tell you though is that's the final process. That's diversity. We have to think of diversity. Yes, it's much easier to just grow corn and soybeans, but realize that's not conducive to soil health. Long term, it's not conducive to profitability either.